Hello, welcome everyone to the Indegene Digital Summit. This is the Generative AI in Life Sciences Sorting the Hype from the Hope session. My name is Tarun Mathur. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Indegene. So I oversee our AI and generative AI efforts for the services Indegene renders to our customers. And today we're very fortunate to have a guest speaker with us. I'd like to introduce Matt Anderson. He's the Chief Digital Officer and Managing Director of Digital at the Carlyle Group. He's a well-known thought leader. He has a very good perspective in terms of looking at things not only from the business lens of the P&L, but also the technology lens. So I want to welcome Matt to this conversation and looking forward to talking about generative AI in life sciences. Hi, Matt.
Hey, great. Thanks for having me, Jared. I'm excited to be here.
Great, thanks. So let's start off. I want to talk about what some of the observations that Indegene has had with our clients, especially over the past year and a half, as the generative AI hype has been building. When we started our work and looking at what the potential of generative AI was, what we very interestingly noticed that our clients were broadly divided into two camps. We had those that were looking at experiments and pilots and were really trying to see how we can capitalize on it, and those that were basically putting in formal policies to restrict it and block it, right? A lot of it came from some of the news around data privacy, and I know there was the famous Samsung information leak. Since that time, I think there's been a lot of evolution, but I'm wondering from your lens, have you seen that divide? Is that divide changing? And what are kind of the drivers behind any change, if you've seen any?
There definitely is a divide. I think what you're seeing with your customers is exactly right. A lot of people are very concerned about privacy, that or your data or even your intellectual property, right? And some of that has, I think you could go all the way back to the people that have created content that ultimately was used and harvested to train these models, have had some problems with this, all the way to, those of us now considering how we can use this for business applications, in your instance, obviously in life sciences and others. But when you think about where the market is going on this, security is going to reign supreme. This is too powerful of a technology for the security problems to persist. And I would say, often when I give talks about this subject, I talk about the four pitfalls of AI. But the fifth one is really the one that's the most important one, which is inertia and passiveness in companies that are not trying these technologies out. I mean, we have seen some extraordinary things that AI and generative AI more broadly have been able to do. And we own hundreds of companies, right? Carlyle does, and across those companies, we're seeing just business cases that are coming out in the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars of EBITDA ranges, depending on the company that you're talking to. So I think if you're not experimenting with this technology because you're worried about privacy, you're really missing the point, or you're missing, an opportunity. You do need to, be careful about how you experiment, like setting up walled gardens, those kinds of things. Some of you may have seen that last week, OpenAI announced the launch of a new product. They said it was the largest announced since the ChatGPT announcement, which was ChatGPT Enterprise. And we actually helped OpenAI with that over the course of the summer. We handed them requirements. We are one of the only finance companies in the world that's a part of the alpha. So we have a group of people right now banging away using that, and we are able to load confidential files in, and we obviously don't put things in still with personal information, social security, any of those, health, salary, those kinds of things, because it doesn't need to know that for business applications. So that's more of just like a prudence thing. But we've been playing now with this for almost a week, and some of the things we've seen, I think if your fear is overwhelming your curiosity, you have a real problem coming, because the ability of an organization to start to create competitive advantage using these kinds of tools, it's one of those things where you begin to accelerate, and your rate of acceleration can itself increase, and that can cause you to leave your competition in the dust. So it's not, I don't have like a smoking gun right now to say like, hey, these are the things you can do to kind of leave your competition in the dust, but just some of the early things that I've seen even our teams being able to do now with this technology. I mean, you can see how this is highly transformative to all business.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, we kind of see it from the same lens that even when there was these organizations that were putting restrictions on it, we at Indigene at least we felt it doesn't really matter. But this is the direction things are moving, right? And you have to run those experiments, those pilots, and it's just a matter of timing, right? And like the OpenAI announcement is really interesting and exciting. I think prior to that announcement, folks like us were even saying, well, what if we go with our partners at Azure or AWS with Bedrock and those ones? They've already established some sort of trust and data privacy mechanism, so we build off of that, and with the assumption that it's just a matter of timing before these things scale out broadly. But you had said one thing that kind of resonated really well is that at Carlyle, you have such a large portfolio, and you're looking at so many different opportunities. What are some of the kind of the low-hanging fruit opportunities with Gen AI that you're seeing some good ROI with versus things that may be longer term potential? Because we also, in terms of a framework in determining use cases, we broadly separate things that you can do now, right, that yield some good results that are unique to generative AI. Pharma and life sciences has been using AI, ML in its various forms for quite a while now, but Gen AI is kind of unlocking some new opportunities. And there's also some kind of more visionary things. They're saying, okay, in the not too distant future, we should be able to realize some other use cases that maybe today we aren't ready for, but we know those will happen. But I'm wondering, from your portfolio, have been any exciting things, especially in life sciences, that you see on the short term and long term horizons?
Yeah, I would sort of break this up into kind of three buckets. The first is, whenever you talk to someone in technology and you ask them to do something that's going to drive a lot of business value, almost the first protest from anyone in technology is we got to do something about the data, right?
Yeah.
We have to clean it. We got to get it in a fill in the blank, right? Like there's all these different problems with sort of the underlying data in general. And I would say one of the most foundational things that generative AI can do that a lot of other tools can't do is it can handle really messy data. And it not only handles it, but it can map old data into new data formats. And it can look for anomalies and it can look for missing values. And you can build like an agent process on top of something like, OpenAI GPT, where you're able to have it bring up, here are all of the examples that I'm finding. Do you want to do what I suggest, right? Those kind of human in loop processes around that. And so, I really think it's not quite industrialized yet to, be an application that just kind of can handle it. But I think there's a big amount of disintermediation coming to people that are helping with master data management issues, right? And which has traditionally been big projects that take a lot of years, take a lot of bodies. This is going to really change the way that works. And then once you get past that foundational element, there's some really exciting things that we are seeing. The first one has been talked about a lot, but I think people don't really realize how fast this is taking off, which is software development. There is a very real possibility that in the next 3 to 5 years, that software development improves somewhere on the order of 30 to 50% in efficiency. That means if you needed 100 developers, you'll need somewhere between 70 or 50 going forward, because when we talked to our portfolio, we just heard over and over again, when I deployed Copilot, or Amazon has a version as well, but something to help me basically write code, my developers got 20 to 30% more efficient out of the gate. And when they got training, somewhere around 50 to 60%. So those, if you think about just how much of the economy, like GDP, the cost associated with building things is software developers, and then you suddenly made that 20 to 30% more efficient, or maybe even more than that over the next 5 years, that is a huge, huge impact. And it's not just, you shouldn't think about that as like, oh, these people are going to be laid off. That's not really what's going to happen. This like almost every area of the economy is just short labor. There are not that many software developers compared to how many are needed in the world, right? And so this technology is really going to unleash a whole new value. So we're seeing it in software development. We're seeing it in things like claims processing and claims handling, things like revenue realization. There's a lot of our portfolio actually in the health space, not necessarily in life sciences as much right now, but in the health space, that are really working with sensitive data, doing very interesting things. One of our companies actually has built a whole set of LLM tools that work in an array with sort of an agent on top and a human in the loop process that processes clinical trial data and is able
Mhm.
to take significant time out of the clinical trial process where you have to accumulate, look at all the data, make sure you're not missing values, and then submit that for approval. That process now they do with way less people and way faster than ever before, using a whole array of LLMs. So we are seeing real value cases and real EBITDA unlocks that people are planning for. And I think
Yeah.
still we're not even in the top of the first inning. We're like batter one has come up to the plate. That's where we are.
Yeah, that's exciting, and it totally resonates with me. As in my role, I wear a couple of hats, but one of them I still am a developer as well, and I can totally validate that these tools I use Copilot as well as some other tools. It's made life completely different as a developer. And I would say 50% is probably an understatement in many cases, especially if you're building something new. Starting with that blank IDE is tough, but all of a sudden now you can actually get seed code and a starting effort from these AI system. It really makes it a big difference from a developer's life. The other thing we've noticed, and I wonder if you heard this from your portfolio as well, is that it's from software development. Typically in our verticalized spaces, we have our engineering teams and you have your SMEs or business teams. And then you have the product managers who kind of shepherd the two and kind of merge them and bring to life. Now that intersection has become more pronounced in that you can actually start to have your business experts act in some sense as software engineers, right? The language of development in generative AI, the domain specific language is English, right? It's not Python, it's not R. So our business experts are actually able to create prompts, test them, validate them, and then ship them over to the engineers to fold into the larger solution. And that's changed even the entire thought process around the development methodology and even the roles in the company, right? Who had prompt engineers in their team, a few years ago, right? So have you seen that across your portfolio as well, especially those companies that are kind of specialized, verticalized in this space?
Yeah, we held one of the very first generative AI summits in all of private equity, we were told, with the portfolio we had. About 20 companies, 40 C-level executives join us. And then we had companies share what they were doing with those who wanted to figure out other things they should be doing. So we had the leaders and the laggards, but the laggards were eager laggards. And one of my favorite demos we saw was from a complete non-developer. This person basically works alongside policy underwriters for collectible cars. And what they had figured out was that when you're talking to people that are looking to insure a collectible car, it's really important that you understand if that's their primary vehicle or if that's really a collector car for them, that they're not going to drive very much because you can offer much lower rates. And so they had used GPT and integrated it themselves and asked GPT how to do this into Excel. And when you start talking to the person about the car, it will just auto prompt GPT and pull up all these facts about a 1968 Corvette Stingray or whatever it is. So you can start to really have a discussion with the person to see how avid of a fan they are. And in that discussion, oftentimes people will give things away, about, well, I have an extra garage or I keep it covered. And that gives you a lot more confidence that you should underwrite the policy. Completely non-developer developed. And honestly, it was everyone's favorite example because they had plans to integrate tons of other questions, and then they were integrating it into their data set to go and find out of their little BI application, go get me this data and bring it into this Excel file. So they were basically building their own smart Gen AI form and kind of conversation handler, completely not developer oriented. And the point that you bring up is really important. I think you have to step way, way back, like almost, I wouldn't quite say it's at the level of the book Sapiens, but if you were to really come back, a large part of the Reformation and the Renaissance was driven by just the unleashing of the power of words into people's language in the form of the
Yeah.
printing press. This is that again,
Yeah.
right? Like these languages, like Python and R and, compile, all this kind of stuff. Really, what that's done is it's separated the knowledge worker from being able to make the thing that, creates value or unleashes and unlocks value. And they have to go through an intermediary, right? That intermediary with people like you and me and product managers and those kinds of things. And increasingly, I think what we're going to see is that the gap between executing a technology project that unleashes tons of knowledge worker value and the person that has the idea, they're just not going to need anything in between, right? Soon. And we're not there quite yet, but that's the direction it's heading. And if you think about what that unleashes, it unleashes the power of human capital more broadly to just do more than it's ever done, right? Because you don't have now bottlenecks of critical resources that universities have been spitting out for the last 30 years, but not enough of them, for instance, right?
Yep.
And so this is a big trend. What is going to happen here is a really, really big trend.
Yep. Like I say, even my own kids who are college age, they're thinking about their majors. And as a technical guy and engineer guy, I would never have said before, but now I'm saying, you know what, communications isn't a bad thing now. You may want to look at those kinds of those arts. The ability to communicate clearly and concisely has greater value now than ever before. So look at opportunities like that. And your point, I'll tell you, Indigene's experience is directly aligned with what you just outlined. We actually did a reorg internally and rolled out a tool that we built that's designed for the domain experts, right? The non-technical folks to go and create prompts across use cases, enter in content, and actually run what we call unit tests, so they can actually test their prompts and iterate through them, collaborate on them in a very business-friendly interface, right? There's no technology aspect to it other than you choose which LLM you want. We're agnostic to LLMs right now. And when they are satisfied that they have something compelling, they can hit a button and it publishes it as an API, right? Then the engineering team can do something with it if they want to. So it's trying to separate the knowledge-intensive tasks that domain experts should own, right? That's in their wheelhouse, versus the engineering. How do I plug into databases? How do I create an XML? How do I send it to a gateway? That's the engineers take care of that. And we're excited by that because it's dramatically shrunk development time, but also there's some intangibles, and this kind of leads to my next question around ROI, right? Some of the intangibles is not only a reduction in timeline, but actually the nature of solutions are becoming more sophisticated with less iterations, right? When the domain experts are able to do things in their wheelhouse, get it to a certain advanced level, they're the ones that feel the pain more than anybody else, so they know what they're trying to build out. Then we're seeing a type of intangible, or not, I was called indirect ROI internally from generative AI that we didn't see with other types of machine learning and AI approaches. And I'm wondering that when we talk about ROI, I typically get asked by customers, how do we measure ROI with regards to generative AI specifically, right? And we look at direct costs. Okay, how much can I improve overall expenses versus the cost of running these? But these indirect costs seem to be pretty significant now. And I'm wondering, have you looked at frameworks or had discussions around calculating ROI in the generative AI world, looking at not only the business outcome itself, but the effect of process reengineering and these shifted roles within organizations?
Yeah, we haven't. I think we're so early right now that just that kind of, I'll call it almost like follow-on effect, or some of these indirect effects you talked about, including as a business case. I just don't think that there's a lot of even business literature, like there just hasn't been a lot of analysis of it, right? Because quite frankly, when GPT, kind of came out and launched chat, when OpenAI launched chat, it was such a revolutionary moment. It's not like LLMs hadn't existed. They had existed, right? It was really this use case that sort of put it into the hands of the masses and said, well, do what you will with it, right? And the masses banging away at this thing found out it could do a lot more than even OpenAI knew it could do. In fact, there's an article about in the Atlantic, came out 3 or 4 weeks ago, that's very similar. It talks all about how they were so surprised at all the things that ChatGPT could do. So I think like we're still in a phase of even just understanding the direct impacts that it can have. I'll give you a simple example. I was talking to my former CTO yesterday, and I was sharing with him some of the really innovative stuff that we were doing with the new GPT for enterprise. And what's different about Carlisle is like every company has security. With this new version for enterprise, they will not train the core model on your data. Your data is walled off in its own, like any files you load are in its own kind of world, right? So it's much more like almost like an Azure type model, where you sort of have your own instance, right, and can run it. So we've been able to experiment with some things. And my former CTO told me that they loaded tons of unfiltered like Google Analytics type data into this thing, but with a little plugin that also recorded what people were doing on the screen, right? And they just asked it, how could we make more people buy things on the website? And the thing launched off into like an hour-long analysis with them about conversion rate optimization and telling them how they could grow traffic, conversion, sales, all these kinds of things, looking purely just at the data. And it had understood and built a model of their site and how it worked by itself. Like no one knew that you could do that until I probably just said that right now, because no one had thought to try something quite like that. So, I think the ROI is, we're at the point right now, it's so direct. I'll give you an example from Carlisle. We do an analysis where we look at, all of the debt that we might have in our portfolio of companies, right? Because those companies take on debt in order to have the right capital structure. And in the interest rate environment we're in now, where it's a lot more uncertain, you might want to really think about stressing that debt and understanding how it works. We actually used our new version of ChatGPT Enterprise, and we did something in 5 hours that it takes 2 people 14 days to do. That's not 100% improvement. We're talking thousands of percents improvements. And the more that this thing gets understood, I just think there's so much direct value that's going to get unlocked. And then you're absolutely right? How you can reorganize the things you can pursue with those resources, just a totally different world.
Yeah. That's it. So, and you had mentioned the enterprise OpenAI. So, and you basically trained the LLM with your corporate data, right? And one thing we've seen is that there's some debate among organizations that, do I latch on to the large pre-trained models, right? The PT, like you look at what Google's put out, and Titan from Amazon, of course, GPT-4. Then there are this growing ecosystem of open source LLMs where you can either train them or fine tune them with your corporate data and deploy them in your own environment. And broadly, what we're seeing is that the debate is that, do I have this large super Uber model that knows everything, or do I have now an ensemble of fine-tuned or specialized ones that I've trained on my corporate data? We haven't seen the jury come with a verdict in terms of how the direction would go. I would say lately our experiments, at first we were favoring going with the big models, right? So, okay, this thing is trained on everything in the world. It should be more comprehensive and give better. Lately, we've been tackling more the NLP-like tasks. So, for example, you talked about the clinical trials analysis. That's something that we're also looking at from a different angle. Patient engagement is another one. We're doing a lot of work in pharmacovigilance, and what we found is that having less computationally intensive LLMs, but fine-tuned on a narrow task, yields us better results than trying to coax, GPT-3 or GPT-4 to give us those answers. Do you have a point of view in terms of the open source and companies fine-tuning this kind of ecosystem of different models versus these big ones like what OpenAI is doing with GPT-4 or Google's or Amazon's?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is, I think an array of models is going to be the answer for as far as I can see, meaning you're going to want to have multiple models. The way to think about this, at least in the simple way I like to talk about it, is the big platforms. So Google, Facebook, Amazon, OpenAI, Anthropic, Cohere, those kinds of guys, right? They have effectively built models that are like if you took a high schooler and sent them to a liberal arts college. And that high schooler graduates and they're, very excited and they're able to learn new things and specialize. You can give them on the job training, but they have a corpus of knowledge and skills and capabilities that sort of every human should have that's going to move into a professional career of some kind, right? That'd be the way to think about it. And then in addition to that, they have a whole set of like very deep capabilities that they can access if you just know how to kind of work with them and unlock their potential. So it's really is similar to an employee, right? On the other hand, when you're looking at the open source LLMs, or what I would call more narrow LLMs, I think about that as like taking that same high school graduate and sending them to trade school to become, let's say, a mechanic and really, really be amazing at fixing cars. Can you quote Shakespeare? No. Could you analyze a legal document? Absolutely not, right? But could you, find the root cause of an engine failure better than any of those people could ever do your job? Absolutely, right? And so I think that as we look at the way that these models are evolving, we have sort of what I would call broad models and narrow models. And the broad models, I think, are going to sit on top of the narrow models and help trigger them and interpret the results. And one of the other things that's coming soon, in fact, there was an announcement that was released, is that all of the big broad model players know that you need to train these on your own data. And so all the pre-training that you get, if you could also then, fine tune them with your information, you can have the best of both worlds. And OpenAI, for instance, just announced that they're doing this. I think it's on 3.5 that they're going to be doing. They did a partnership with one of the big kind of annotation and training companies. And then there's no doubt in my mind that as you look forward, like with what's going on with the enterprise ChatGPT, well, that's just a prelude to us effectively having your own version of their model, right? Like completely integrated, trained, worked on your data. And so, I think that there will be causes for the detailed models, but those tend to be highly specific tasks where like a pre-trained model wouldn't have seen that kind of information or that kind of task on like the Common Crawl index that a lot of them were trained on at a minimum. So I would say you should be experimenting with both.
Yeah, and actually, if our kind of vector is pointing that direction, that means that the point you made earlier about the table stakes of our data infrastructure, that really needs to be taken a hard look at, right? I know a lot of organizations, especially in life sciences, there are different states of maturity in terms of how they manage enterprise data, and even how you protect it or monetize it. This has now changed the game and the priority a bit, right? In terms of now your data lake, or if you have federated querying or however you manage it, being able to get those data assets, put them into the hands of your domain experts. Like if I mentioned earlier, tying back, making our English speaking domain experts are effectively becoming developers. Now, if they're able to explore your data assets and build those fine tuning sets, that is where potentially a lot of power comes from. So maybe for organizations, I would agree that we maybe need to revisit their enterprise data strategy and how you empowering folks to explore it as a prerequisite to going into this distributed, specialized model environment.
Yeah, that really resonates. I think, my son had a really beautiful vision of the future, which I'll share with you now because I know we're kind of getting low on time. But I think it's a real way to open your mind to how this could play out, right? Which is his version of the future goes something like this. Dad, imagine that we sequence all the genomes of most of the plants and species, and we store those, and we let GPT read it all, right? And by GPT, it just means generative AI. Let it read it all, catalog it, analyze it, etc. And then, I have this flower outside. I live in the mountains, and I wanted to have an extra 2 degrees of heat resistance because I'm a little concerned temperatures are rising. I could just go to GPT and effectively say, hey, I'd like to find all the species that have an extra 1 or 2 degree heat resistance relative to the environment that I work in. And then I would like to just use CRISPR to inject that DNA into the core thing that I'm trying to use, run the experiment. And then I don't speak in that language, but I can just ask a bunch of questions about the results. And all there needs to be is a robot that speaks generative AI that could do that, literally the insertion using CRISPR for me. And there actually are these robots already. So there's right now in the chemistry space, one called Catacomb that interfaces like that. So I think the really important thing for people to see, and the reason I'd like to talk about this vision in the future, is that the barriers between highly technical work and people that can come up with great ideas like that, they're going to fall. They're going to go away. And it's going to unleash a whole new wave of innovation. So it's not just around the edges of companies, like in life sciences, it's going to be in the life science part of life science. That's where this is going to hit. And you really need to be thinking that transformatively.
Your son's a brilliant idea, clearly entrepreneurial spirit. That's a genius idea. And it's
or too many sci-fi movies. Too many sci-fi movies.
I like to look at the more optimistic, not the dystopian futures. And that sounds amazing. There's a ton more questions I'd love to engage you with, but I know we're out of time. So hopefully we'll get an opportunity to have another session. But Matt, thank you so much for doing this really interesting discussion, insightful, and I hope for the audience tuning in, you found it insightful and maybe answers that question about sorting the hype from hope. I think it's actually maybe gone beyond hope. But this is the real world now. Think about your data infrastructure. Think about how you capitalize on generative AI. But if you're holding back, you're probably going to be caught behind the curve pretty quickly. So I think we've answered the title of our talk here. So appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for having me.